Good day, and thank you for joining us today at the Jamestown Foundation. Today I'm joined by Boris Bondarev, who is a former Russian diplomat who served in Cambodia, Mongolia, Switzerland, with a particular functional specialty in arms control and nuclear non-proliferation. He resigned from the Russian Foreign Ministry over the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how the Russian Foreign Ministry at Moscow approaches negotiations uh, and how we should look at any future U.S.-Russian negotiations over peace in Ukraine. So thank you very much for joining us, Boris. I think the first question to put to you is, how is Minister Sergei Lavrov and others preparing to meet with the United States? What is the typical preparation from the Russian Foreign Ministry look like ahead of the leaders' meeting?
Hi, Peter. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. The routine of preparing any meeting or negotiations is in the Russian MFA is quite the same. First, when some meeting is scheduled, then there is a request sent throughout all concerned departments within the ministry and maybe some other agencies to send materials, to send information, to send talking points. Then this Department of Foreign Policy Planning, I think we can translate it into English like this, which collects all these inputs, and they elaborate something like a position. A position that goes then to the deputy minister who is in charge of these negotiations. In our case, if it concerns United States, it will be Sergei Ryabkov, deputy minister in charge of United States, of North America and NATO things. Not NATO, sorry, that's strategic stability. And then when he approves, it goes to Minister Lavrov, who has the final say about this. And when he approves, then it's almost done. When it concerns his own participation in high-level talks, of course, he sends it to the presidential administration to check it, and then it's presented to President Putin, who then writes down agree or I approve or something like that. Then it goes back to the ministry, then it's finished. We have an instruction, we have a position, delegation is equipped, delegation can go and hold the negotiations.
So we know that Vladimir Putin chooses his own words very, very carefully when he's meeting with foreign journalists, with foreign leaders, that he thinks about sort of the positioning and the framing of pictures and video. How sort of concrete is the guidance or specific is the guidance that the presidential office might give to Minister Lavrov? Or, how would you describe the relationship between Lavrov and Putin in terms of sending Lavrov out to speak for Moscow or to negotiate?
Well, the very fact that Lavrov has been foreign minister for more than 20 years under Vladimir Putin says that they have a very good and constructive relationship. Lavrov never says no to Putin. Putin is said to feel very comfortable working with Lavrov. He trusts Lavrov. He is confident that Lavrov will never betray him or never say anything in direct opposition to what Putin has said. So when he sends Lavrov on errand, he's pretty confident that Lavrov will do his best. He will do his job as the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Russia. So what Lavrov says, we should take as an official position of President Putin. Lavrov even may look or sound more harsh than President Putin, but I think it's also can be used to this good and bad cop, so to speak. So President Putin can pose himself always, all the time, as a true peace-loving leader, while his personnel may be more of a hawkish, so to speak. But it's not about some substantial difference in the views, because the views are the same. The view of Sergei Lavrov and the view of Sergei Ryabkov or any other people of Putin government is very simple. We do what President Putin tells us to do. That's it.
Oh, well, yeah, I think President Putin has made it clear how he guides things and um, how he puts his own stamp. And as I recall, there have been issues with diplomats uh, ending up with less than desirable positions because they didn't vote or because they were not sort of actively participating. Is that kind of part of the discipline that's put onto the foreign ministry, or how would you describe sort of the other pieces of control, not just at the top, but to the ministry itself?
Well, I haven't heard about many of such examples that diplomats were punished for their insubordination somehow. Because mostly diplomats are very, very disciplined people. They know what to do. They know the line they must hold on to. So it's very rare that they can fall out of this line, so to speak. Sometimes it happens when they want to be more more hawkish rather than the government, than the President Putin himself. And sometimes some really not very clever guys can say things for which they are punished back home, for instance. But it's not. For instance, if you recall, in 2017, there was in New York, in a Security Council meeting, there was a quarrel between Russian representative, deputy representative, and the British representative. And the Russian said was quite aggressive to the British guy, saying, "Look at my eyes, I'm talking to you," and all this, gangster style things. It was 2017, and it was such behavior was widely disregarded in Russia. It was criticized, and that guy, Vladimir Safrankov, he paid his, he got his damage to his reputation, and his career was stalled for some time. It was 2017 again. It was before this, even before the Skripal case. So the relations between Russia and the United States, Russia and the West were more or less on the level, so to speak. Today, I think such behavior would be rewarded with the medal or something like this, or promotion. But discipline in a ministry is maintained not through punishments or rewards or anything, but through the general mood of conformism. You must stay in the crowd, and 99% are happy to do that.
So when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that the minister style has become, after 20 years, becomes the ministry style. Perhaps you could tell us a few points of interest that you think are worth noting about Minister Lavrov's style in guiding the department, guiding the ministry, and how he would approach negotiations. And is this a break? Is there much of a break from the Soviet past, given that he entered the Soviet foreign ministry back, I believe, in the 1970s?
Well, I don't think that there is much difference in daily governance of the ministry from the Soviet times. However, there is one important difference, because in Soviet times, the ministry was controlled by the Communist Party, by the Central Committee and all. So, and the ministry was reporting to the Central Committee of the Communist Party, so to speak. So it was indoctrinated. The ideology played its role. And when you worked in the ministry and you, for instance, prepared some documents, you had to think not only about political gains, about your job, but also about ideology, to place it properly between the lines of your document. Now it's not the case. There is no ideology, only to say that Russians are above all or something like this, very primitive things. But now minister is much more free in his daily business within his ministry. He reports only to Putin, and Putin, of course, President Putin is not very much, involved in the daily business of the ministry. Of course, he has his own things to attend to, and that is why the minister has free hands. He can appoint people of his choosing. For 20 years, he has accumulated so much authority within these the circles of Russian government that there is little opposition to his choice of his deputies or director of departments or anything like this. So he has built ministry for himself. So I think if there is a new minister in the future, he will have to rebuild it all anew.
So how has out of curiosity, thinking about the mechanics of how a bureaucracy works, thinking about how it used to be physical paper, there were electronic typewriters. Now we've moved to a digital age. Now we're companies for security purposes, or even some governments have moved to an almost entirely paperless kind of office. What does that look like within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs today?
No, it's not paperless. It's very, respects paperwork very much, because papers are much reliable than electronic things. They cannot be erased with just one button. And there's that's why we have never had any such things as WikiLeaks, for instance, in Russia, because you just cannot download secret documents or cables to your memory stick and just get it out of the building. It doesn't work physically. All computers which are there for like confidential correspondence, they are isolated and they are checked. They are physically locked from any external interference. And there is no USB ports even. They are all deactivated or physically removed, for instance. So it's very, very safe, so to speak. And of course, a lot of things are done still on paper. I think it has a lot to do with the age of the ministry senior officials. They are old men. They're not very well acquainted with modern technologies, with IT. And they are used to working with papers. They have cables printed. They have only draft documents which are presented to them on paper. So they work with pen or pencil, making their improvements and all. So it's all good old fashion of, I don't know, 80s, maybe 90s. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia is still actively using fax connection, which is very hard to find anywhere else in Russia. But Russian government agencies, they all have fax, and they use it because fax you can sign a document, then send it by fax, and you get a copy with your signature, and that is okay. Even digital signatures are not that popular. They are already in place. They are being used. But there are some questions, there are some problems with that. Good old paperwork is not to go away in foreseeable future.
So to kind of move back to a little bit of the substance, how well do you think Russian diplomats know who they're facing across the table? How well do you think they understand, the American side, and to some extent, do they understand the European side now that you've had the experience of the last 3 years living in Europe, sort of a little more openly and a little more freely than you might have done as a diplomat?
Well, yeah, of course, they have these portraits of their counterparts before. They have some CVs and biographical materials about who is this person, what's is his or her education, is its roots, its hobbies, its political achievements, and all. So, of course, Russian negotiators will have to make first conclusion about who is their counterpart across the table. Then, of course, a lot of things you will know in communicating with the person, of course, because what you have on paper, it is always not sufficient. Yes, because any human being is much more than you can write about him on a paper. So, of course, for president, for his contacts, and for Minister Lavrov, personnel tries to find out as much information as possible, requesting other agencies like intelligence services and all to provide some additional information to know more details about the persons who will be across the table. But I think it's pretty normal job, and the same is done in the United States and any other countries. And regarding whether Russians understand Americans or Europeans, that's a big question. Because Russians are always projecting themselves upon the other side. Even living in Switzerland or in European countries, many Russians still think that there is no substantial difference between government system, say, in Switzerland and in Russia. They say all is the same. Everything is corrupt. There is no legal law that cannot be changed by a phone call, or court decision can be influenced by the government. And it's easy because the only difference is the Swiss people, for instance, Europeans or Americans, they cover it up more successfully than Russians. Russia is just more open and more sincere about it. We don't hide it. We say, yes, you can call this judge and tell him what sentence he must deliver, and he will do it. Well, and when you tell these people that it doesn't work like this, exactly like this, in Europe or in America, they say, nah, it's just appearances. We know by heart how it all works, because what works in Russia works everywhere else in the world. So that is why when they meet Americans, they look at them as other Russians. That's why some European or American people in the past would operate in values, principles, some kind of immaterial things, in using them as argument in a discussion. Russian delegations would, what's this? What's this all about? How should we discuss these non-existent things? We won't discuss money, we won't discuss power, we won't discuss influence, we won't discuss tanks, fleets and everything. We don't want to discuss values, because these values are no value to us, really. So I think any future discussions between negotiation between Russian and Americans will be proceeding from this, basic misconception.
That's an interesting point, because there's a country that I'm more familiar with in terms of how they negotiate. The People's Republic of China often approaches negotiations by talking about principles, and to discuss the principles that will then sort of shape any future compromise or how the text is interpreted. And they use that as the opening piece. It's a different set of principles than I think many in Europe and the United States would use, but they sort of state the principles, get agreement, and then use that as leverage as they negotiate text. And given some of the shared heritage of where the PRC's diplomatic behavior was learned, how they were taught by the Soviets, in particular in the 20s and 30s, it's kind of an interesting divergence that the Chinese would go this direction and the Russians have focused on power.
Well, that may come from the fact that PRC is still an ideological state. And the ideology operates with these principles, values, other constructs. They cannot say our ideology is to take money, right? No, their ideology is to build communism, just and fair society for all and blah, blah, blah. And just like Soviet Union also did operate with all these communism slogans, this struggle against the bourgeoisie and all these things, of course. It's what Putin's country, Putin's government is free from all these ideological things. They don't care about this. Their only ideology is to stay in power, like forever. That's it. And to sacrifice whatever is in the way. So we see this. They are killing hundreds of thousands of Russians in this war, just for this goal. China wants to be looked upon by the global South, by other countries, as a country that promotes a constructive and human agenda. This agenda must always be about something more than the material values, right? Something non-material, a better life, like American Dream, for instance. Yes, American Dream is not about making career, having money. It's about being free, being able to, open up yourself in the best way, something like this. That's about Chinese. The Russians, well, they have been traumatized by 90s, by this catastrophical transition from ideological Soviet Union into non-ideological Russia. And now they try to see the most, the lowest parts of human psychology, so to speak, in all that people say and do. If you do something good, they will suspect that you're trying to hide something bad. And, they are very suspicious. That also in all your sayings and all your actions, they will look to the, to the most base, intentions or something like that. That is why all this previous American rhetoric about human rights, about humanitarian interventions and all it has always been met in Russia with suspicions and and even hatred, because it was always like you lie to us. You tell us about human rights, but we know that you want to get our riches, for instance, our natural resources. You speak about freedom, but we know that in truth, in reality, you want to enslave us, something like that.
So I think to close it out today, how should we understand if the Russians are serious at the negotiating table or not? Because I think this is one of those questions. It was obviously a subject of dispute in some meetings between the Ukrainians and the United States about how do we understand whether or not Moscow will actually come to the table in a serious way and have an interest in negotiating rather than just wasting time. What would we be looking for? What should we be looking for outside government to see?
Well, I think the first and most reliable sign of Russian being interested, really interested, seriously interested in negotiations is that they initiate those negotiations by themselves. First, they propose the venue and the date, and they say, let's talk. We want to talk, let's talk here and there. We are ready to go wherever you want, and then let's talk. When it comes from Moscow, you may think that they are serious about this. It may not be so, but still it can be. If they are like just now, say, it's okay with us to have negotiations, but we don't want to make the first step. We wait for you to approach us with some offer. That means that they are not seriously and genuinely interested. They think that the business is going on very well for them. The war is going on. They are advancing on Ukraine, for instance, and they are not really interested in anything rather than buying out some time and maybe squeezing some concessions from you. Taking into account that America is now showing extremely high interest in making anything that would look like a deal. And Russia is not seriously interested in such a deal. They know that they will get what they want, Ukraine, for instance, with this deal or without. Only that plays a role is the time that they will have to spend on this. Maybe with this deal, they will get it in 6 months. Without the deal, they will get it in 1 year. Putin is quite prepared, he thinks, for a long war of attrition. And he sees now that America and Europe now are folding. They are exhausting their reserves. They resolve to confront him. So, well, he must wait and see. He must wait for the apple to fall down into his hands. So that's the first step. If Russia says, not only we are ready for negotiations, please invite us, but they invite you to negotiations, then you will see that they are more serious than before. And it doesn't mean that if you invite them and they send Lavrov, Ushakov, I don't know, Peskov, someone else, it doesn't mean that they are interested and they are serious. They may just waste some time, just play with you, just make you think that they are interested. And we have seen that there have been a couple of meetings, and still the progress is not yet very much significant.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Bondarev. This was a useful conversation and interesting to understand a little bit more about how the foreign ministry works. And we look forward to reading more of your analysis in Eurasia Daily Monitor.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.